What a great remake the Spyro Reignited trilogy is. All of my favourite levels, brought up to the present day by a competent team that knows when to remain faithful to the original. It's been a lot of fun for me to make this video, going through the graphics options and seeing how they all compare. There are general graphics quality presets for people who don't have the time to learn and to adjust each of them individually. These presets are low, medium, high, ultra, and it'll say custom if you've been messing about with the options individually. You naughty boy. Here is how low, medium, high, and ultra compare. If you stick to low, you'll get very high frame rates, and perhaps ignorance is bliss, as you won't know what you're missing out on, graphically. But bumping it up to medium is a big leap up, and I strongly recommend you do it if your computer can handle it. Suddenly, everything looks like it's lit correctly. Shadows now come from every item in the game, reflections look right, and there's enough grass and detail littering the floor to make the world look alive, instead of being flat and sparse. And it enables anti-aliasing for a nice smooth image. But jump up to high, and you'll see how everything was meant to be lit. Shadows are now dark enough to be called shadows, and everything blends together nicely. Plus, there's even more stuff decorating the ground. And Ultra just spams the floor with even more stuff. The highest and second highest settings are generally so similar, I don't think that both are needed. It's kind of hard to test frame rates for 3 games sporting over 100 levels in total, so I just booted up a home hub and a level from Spyro 1 and tested frame rates while stood in the most demanding spot that I could find within about 30 seconds of playing. I used a Ryzen 2200G, which is the slowest gaming setup I think it's reasonable to have in 2019. Compared with low settings, medium gives you 70% of the frame rate, and high and ultra are super similar at about 60%-ish. In other words, I was left with 60% of the performance by jumping from minimum to maximum settings. Your choice is simple. If your frame rate is struggling, choose low preset. Otherwise, you might as well game at ultra because it looks so much better, with medium as a fallback option if ultra doesn't run quite fast enough for your liking. High is kind of irrelevant. They should have simplified the options by removing the second highest of everything in my opinion. I was able to game smoothly on Ultra at 720p or on low at 1080p. By smoothly I mean somewhere between 40 and 60 FPS most of the time, which I felt was perfectly playable on this kind of game. I will warn you that at these resolutions, the image will either be very jagged or extremely blurry depending on whether you have anti-aliasing turned off or on. By the time you reach high, the game takes on a lovely Pixar-esque look, and it's hard to imagine a Spyro game looking much better than this, so I try to aim for that. Let's go through all of the graphics options in order. Motion blur is obvious enough. Anything moving gets blurred. It can make the game look smoother when at lower frame rates, and applies not just to the scenery but to every object in the game. I normally hate motion blur, but it's done so smoothly in this game that I think it adds to the Pixar-esque quality of the graphics. It would be nice to be able to adjust the strength of this effect, but I have no problems keeping this one on. Vignette, also known as Vignette, darkens the edges of the screen. That's it. Up to you if you keep this one on or not. I spotted a 1 FPS drop by having it enabled. Bloom makes things look brighter by adding a glow to them. This is an effect which spills across whatever's around. Upping the bloom setting makes the effect stronger. Now I wouldn't have expected more bloom to slow your PC down more, and even saw my frame rates getting marginally better the higher the setting went. Though oddly, the game's set graphics presets indicate that higher bloom should be reserved for higher graphics options. Maybe an oversight on the developer's behalf here. Regardless, treat this as personal preference. Turn it off for absolute best performance, or high for not much less. Anti-aliasing smooths the pixels out by blurring edges. This game uses temporal anti-aliasing, which gets data from previous frames to make future ones smoother. This can sometimes result in a smeary effect when things are in motion, but if you're using motion blur anyway, then you probably won't notice this. Your choices are to have no anti-aliasing, or to have low or high temporal anti-aliasing. I would suggest having it on, as it does a good job of hiding jagged edges and I think complements the cartoony style nicely. I couldn't spot much difference between low and high setting, and there wasn't much difference performance-wise either. If you game at higher resolutions, then I think low should be enough. And there's another reason to enable TAA as well. It allows for lovely reflections such as this one here. This only applies to some bodies of water. The rest of the reflections are controlled by another graphics option, which I'll cover now. Screen space reflections are as close to ray tracing as you'll get in this game, and determines how reflections are done. With it disabled, shiny things will resort to pre-baked cube maps, reflecting the scenery or sometimes just the background sky of whatever level you're playing. But with screen space reflections enabled, it will reflect anything drawn on screen that it thinks should be reflected there. Some water in the game, like the stuff at the start of Spyro 3, didn't change even with SSR off, but other bodies of water looked much better with it enabled. The other place these reflections can be seen are on reflective pots in the levels. These are absolutely beautiful and I think are some of the best examples of screen space reflection that I've ever seen. It's bordering on ray tracing, and only breaks if you're really trying to break it. Low reflects the world and Spyro, while medium and high settings reflect items as well and look extremely similar to one another, and they slow the PC down by the same amount, so I'd say you might as well just set it to high. The effect is worth it in this game. As mentioned previously, if you're not seeing nice reflections where you think you should, make sure you have temporal anti-aliasing enabled. Ambient Occlusion is the shading where objects meet. Having it on makes all the individual objects making up the level blend in far better and more realistically. I recommend having this enabled. It doesn't even have to be a high setting either. As long as it's on low, then you'll get the bulk of this effect, and you'll save some FPS compared with the medium and high setting as well. Shadow quality matters. The lowest quality preset may say low, but at the setting there are pretty much no shadows. It looks horrible, please don't play the game like this. At medium, they appear, but the objects in the world still don't look right. High is where it's at. If there's one setting to raise to high, then it's this one. Do it. And Ultra makes the blur of the shadows a bit smoother, but it's not that essential. Of all the graphics options, I found this one impacted frame rates the most. But again, the difference in FPS between medium and Ultra wasn't much. Even just on medium, your flame casts shadows across the world. I love this effect and expected it to be reserved for higher qualities, but this effect also nicely shows the quality difference between the different shadow settings. At medium, the edges of the shadows are grainy. At high, they look nice. And at Ultra there's a bit more definition to the shapes again. Having shadow quality on at least medium also enables another advanced graphical effect. You'll be able to see shadows cast through his wings and through other thin parts of his body. I don't know many games where I've seen this effect in action. Though I also don't know many games where you play as a purple dragon made of rubber. What more? And lastly, the shadow setting also decides the distance that water caustics can be seen from, which is that nice shiny reflection from the water's surface that you can see in examples such as this one. High is significantly better than medium in this regard. Foliage chooses the amount of grass and flowers on the floor. The higher up this setting you go, the fewer bold patches there will be in fields and the like. And it gets a bit prettier because flowers look nice and you get more of them as well. View distance doesn't do as much as you might think. It only seems to change how far away details on the ground are drawn from, like grass and small rocks. In an older game, you'd expect low view distance to turn distant scenery to mush, or to disappear entirely. But not so in this game. Enemies, gems and the like remain visible right into the distance. This was also a strength in the original PlayStation 1 games, so it's nice to see it carried across. I didn't find foliage or view distance affected my FPS that much, but together they make more of an impact. Turning both up to maximum will make the worlds look a lot prettier, but if you want to save FPS then you can opt for lots of grass close by, or less grass but to a greater distance, and either option won't cost you too much on their own. One problem I encountered on lower settings was that Spyro would slide along the ground. It seemed to be tied with high frame rates, so if you're lucky enough to be in a situation where your frame rate is too high, then enable VSync. Hopefully these bugs will be patched up soon. I'm not alone in having them. It is lovely to see the original Spyro trilogy so faithfully recreated for a new generation of gamers. And for me, it's been an utter treat to revisit all of my favourite levels and to be endlessly impressed with the facelifts that they've all been given. All 3 games for the price of 1 is incredible value for money and has been more than worth it for me. I couldn't have asked for a better revamp of one of my favourite childhood game series.